There are so many rejections we all go through, but you are so close to the success. You might be just a mile away. Like, the Mount Everest climbing experience I described in my book, I was 1 mile away from the flagpole without seeing that flagpole. So at that point, there's 200 people that day climbing, only 3 made it because many people returned. They couldn't see that. No one knew it's only 1 mile away. Have they all known it's only 1 mile away, they would all stick right around to make that last mile. But that's part of life. Oftentimes, we don't see how close we are to the success. We just decide to quit on our own. That's what happens, right? That's 80% of the time, that's what happens because you don't get to see that last mile, but keep trying until you get there.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, man, I am excited. We're going to have a great conversation today. Now, we had some technical difficulties, and hopefully they won't transfer onto our recording. I hope we got those all straightened out. But I have Helen Yu on the show today. Helen, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to be here today.
Now, we're going to talk about startups because Helen is the author of Ascend Your Startup, as you can see right over here, and it's Conquering 5 Disconnects to Accelerate Growth. However, I think there's your book, Helen, there's a lot of learnings for really any type of organization because these disconnects can happen at any given point in time. And goodness to say, when you start looking at where a lot of organizations are today and the transformations that they are having to go through in order to survive, it's almost like everybody's having to do some startup connections, right? But before we get into that discussion, if you could tell the B2B DM gang a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Thank you, Jim. It's such an honor to be on your show. I am the founder and CEO of Taigang Advisory. I started my company 4 years ago as a growth accelerator for startup. Before that, I was with Oracle. I started my career, as a matter of fact, as an accountant and financial analyst, working for insurance company and manufacturer. And then I joined Oracle. I actually joined Oracle through acquisition, really through Hyperion acquisition. So I was learn how to code, right? And designed and build 400 plus financial applications. And then later on got into the career of sales and marketing, right? Adobe was where I learned about marketing, and then get into Marketo, learned about startup growth. So scaling a company to, when I joined Marketo, they were a $60 million company. We grew the company to 280 million in 3.5 years, right before they were acquired by the PE firm. And then has been quite a journey, but entire my career was with marketing, sales and marketing, and customer experience.
Well, and when you started talking about your experience, you start looking at some of the vital elements that organizations have to be able to conquer and climb, like you're talking about, in order for them to launch, accelerate, and then also sustain. Because we can't just acquire, we also have to retain. Although when you do start looking at growth, and growth as an accelerant, and many of the things that I think a lot of startups are focusing in on today, it really is putting more emphasis on that marketing and sales side. Wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. Marketing and sales it's very vital for any company, regardless of the size of the company. But really having that really in mind as an executive, knowing hiring the right people at the right time, And then how you align the strategy with the day-to-day execution is so crucial, right? Sales is not about, hey, you close one deal in the quarter, you're all set. It's a nonstop constant, right? You close the deal in the quarter, then there's a reset button every quarter. You're back there and doing that again. Marketing is also very vital, and without the pipeline generation, without all the work and really groundwork the marketing team sets up, sales cannot scale their growth. So the alignment between sales and marketing, really one of the, I would say, secrets for any fast-growing companies these days.
Well, as you were talking too, I started thinking about how that has even gotten more complex. So when you start looking at, a lot of the organizations that you do work with, I hear it, many times over myself is, people are saying how they've exhausted, their connections and network, how, people used to be in a certain position and now they've exited. We talk about the massive exodus that's still yet to come. I think when you start looking at sales and marketing, and I start looking at the disconnects and looking at the risks associated with having a successful startup, it seems to me like the risk in that side has gone way up.
Absolutely, Jim. So if you think about the disconnect, right? In my book, I talk about 5 disconnect. The disconnect, what that means is really the blind spot the leaders have, right? Can be founder or any executive they have. For example, if you are a sales leader, you may not understand everything that your team, how they, their daily routine, where they may have missed the opportunity if they lose a deal. Even though they win the business, there are a lot of intricacies to the details of how they win the business, right? So as a leader, you oftentimes have this blind spot, which I call disconnect. When it comes to, I lay it out to 5 disconnect. The product market fit is one of the disconnect, meaning that you have to understand, right, what problem you're trying to solve. When you go to sell to anybody, you better understand what really matters to them, right, in order for you to make the deals. And then, once you understand what matters to them, you have to articulate why your solution is a good fit for them. And then you have to prove where you've done that elsewhere, right? So to me, sales is really how you show people you can take them from being ordinary to being extraordinary and show them the path to get there. That's how you can really close a business, regardless where you are at. And then when it comes to marketing, it's very interesting because you think about when a prospect start evaluating your solution, you make sure your company or your solution is out there, findable, right? Because when they do go to internet search, I want to look for a financial solution, you pop up, right? Or the keywords, right? You want to make sure first you understand what your brand stands for. And then secondly, you want to make sure if those are a keyword, you can be searchable. And then not only that, you have to also have your own target. I call ICP, ideal customer profile, right? Meaning that if you're targeting enterprise accounts, you want to make sure you target them, you generate contents that's going to be interesting to them. So they're going to come to your website to read the content you generated, to interact with you, engage with you, because you don't want to just go, hey, Jim, I want to sell you something. You want to say, hey, Jim, I heard that you're interested in buying a car. Here are some of the recommendations, right? So that's how you approach, and that's how marketing team can help you generate these leads, and making sure when the time a salesperson calls a prospect, the conversation is right to the point at the right time, and it's personalized message. So all those intricacies are so critical. You have to understand also what is the minimum viable team you need in order to achieve those goals, right? I talk about the defined minimum disconnect, where not only do you find the minimum viable product, the solution, also, the most importantly, minimum viable repeatability, right? If you've had success to go after this retail vertical, how do you repeat that to 5 or 10 times more, customers or accounts. And then the third one is voice customer, right? We talk about once you in the SaaS world, the time when you close the deal is the beginning journey you have with your customer. It's not the end, not unlike old days, right? You sell, you close the deal, you're done because then, it's there. But now in the SaaS world, you can never take your customer for granted. You have to keep working and keep understanding what matters to them, because what matters to them shift from time to time. What matters to them also different, varies, depends on who you're talking to. What matters to CMO might be different from the CRO. What matters to CRO might be different from the marketer, right? You interact with. So you need to know not only what solution, what problem you're trying to solve, also whom you're really solving the problem for, because based on the persona and your interaction engagement might be very different, right? And then I also talk about the process disconnect and measurement disconnect. So you want to make sure you have the process to support your sales leaders from account planning perspective, from deal closure perspective, from deal approval perspective, all those, right? You talk about sales stages, I can go on and on, but then marketing is the same. You better have a demand generation process. You better have your product marketing process or content generation process. There are tons of that. Having a website is not a marketing strategy. Right. So that alone does not give you enough of traffic or generate anything. You need to have a real strategy to align whatever you're doing with your go-to-market strategy, with your sales, right? Go-to-market motion with the, based on the ICP, based on the persona. So there's so much into this, but you have, in order to hold people accountable or your team accountable, you better have metrics to measure success. So that's the 5 disconnect I illustrated in the book, and with some real life examples there, right? How some companies success versus others fail.
Well, and you also do, I really like the way that you actually tied it into, your own journey and trek of actually, climbing Mount Everest. And as you were running through all of these, disconnects, I started thinking about, prime failure points, and so when you look at the statistics and, we talked about transformation, everybody's going through some type of transformation and startup process. But if you look at startups in isolation, over 90% of them fail. So yes. Helen, why do they fail?
Well, I think why they fail, most of the time, the founders or CEOs, they just don't know what they don't know about, right? So I would say that some of them are most of the founders are brilliant. They wouldn't start a company if they're not brilliant enough to come up with the idea, right? As they shift from idea to product to market to scale, along that journey, they're only good at one thing or two things. And they're always saying times that they don't have experienced. I call Sherpa. When you climb a mountain, you want to find a Sherpa who's been there, done that, right? To guide you. And if you don't find the right person, the experienced person to guide you at the right time, then you may not be aware of these disconnects, right? I described earlier. As a sales leader, why they fail, sometimes they have blind faith in the team, right? If they don't provide, they don't onboard their team quick enough, or they don't really provide hands-on really guidance when the time they need it. Sometimes just one engagement, right? The off engagement with their prospect that could really throw them off. Also, the lack of understanding of customer insights, right? I often say that they don't know what really matters to the people they interact with oftentimes, right? Because if they speak to one person, not the decision maker, and then the person could be misled, right? You think about it. If I talk to Jim, I talk to you, you want to buy a car, but you love this BMW X5, let's say, but your wife may not like that at all. If I keep selling you this car, you love it, you got budget, everything, you have everything, but then you may not be the final decision maker. Maybe your wife would be the one. And then I could have missed the boat completely. Meanwhile, the competitor is talking to your wife into another car. She already made the decision, right? She's going to buy that no matter what. And then, so I spend all my energy selling you this car, thinking that's a done deal, but then someone else already talked to your wife. So that happens all the time in real life, right? Think about it. And I know it sounds really funny, but in reality, when we make a large deal, oftentimes these companies they evaluate multiple solution providers, right? So you have to understand the decision-making process, how many layers of decisions they have to make. And you need to have, I call customer heat map. You need to have internal insider coach for you, right? And then understand, how the decision being made, the buying decision being made, any third party there. Sometimes they have RFI, partners out there driving the evaluation. You also need to know what really matters to each of the decision maker. And then what are the decision criteria for that? And then how do you tackle them one by one, right?
Right. What you described right there, I think, starts getting into the separation between, doing business with different sizes of organizations, maybe even, whether they're, a domestic or a global organization. I mean, you have all these different factors that start coming into play. It can get quite complex. And so I think when I actually read the part where you were talking about the targets, and I want to make sure I put it in the right way. You said that founders or climbers do not aim for the summit, right? And I don't know if that's you, if you were kind of explaining and giving credence to that and context to that as you were just walking through that. But if you could help me understand, if they're not targeting or aiming for the summit, what are they aiming for?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. I, through my climbing experience, right, you would say, let's talk about the why behind my ascending Mount Everest first, right? So that was really a sacred promise to my grandmother to leave her ashes on a tall mountain. That's why I felt unstoppable. I made up my mind that nothing would hold me back from my climb. So my destination really started out not on any map, right, but in my mind. So for any founders, and when they started a business, they got to understand the why, right? However, I reached to the top. I was not as excited as everyone else felt it might be, because you were a little bit depressed at that point, right? Climbing all the way to the summit, you achieved your destination in the short, I would say temporarily. The most important thing is how do you come down, right? Come down from that summit safely, taking your entire team with you, and then so that you can celebrate that accomplishment, right? At the end of the day, if you just climb by yourself, get to a destination, and then alone, how you feel might be quite different from you were able to safely, come down from the mountain with the team to celebrate that. The summit really means different things to different people, right? Some people, really, that means, hey, I just want to have a work-life balance, be able to support the family in a very in a decent manner. And some wants to make a dent to the universe, like Steve Jobs, right, or Elon Musk. And others may not be have that kind of ambition, which is fine. To me, it's like no matter what it is, figure out what really success look like to you, and then that's where you're going to start drawing. Here's what my summit is, but getting, really remember, right, what's more important for you is how you return from that destination and to celebrate that success with your team or family.
Okay, so in the book you also talk about what is it, V2 Mom?
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're also opening the door up to, as well as explaining what that means? So What is V2 Mom, M-O-M? What does that mean?
Yeah, V2 Mom is a concept that Salesforce created. That's really got really popular in the SaaS industry. The first V really represents vision, right? Vision. And then the second V is values. Vision, really how you make the future resonate, right? Values is the core belief of your company. And then M means, right, represents methods. That's the path, how you get to achieve your vision. And then O is obstacles, that's a risk you have to go through, you have to reduce in order to achieve your goal. Lastly, that M is measures, right? That's how you track the results. So as a company at a very top level, if you understand, you set up a vision for the entire company, you share the core belief of the company, and then you illustrate how you can really take, what is the path for the entire company to achieve that goal, and then what are the risks you have to overcome to achieve that goal, and then how you measure the result. Then you trickle down to each cross-functional leader, especially sales and marketing. That's how you can get your sales and marketing team fully aligned all the way through, how some of the companies more successful than others. That sounds very simple, Jim, but it's not really. I've been to so many companies where they never heard of this concept. They really don't have the metric to measure the success. And that's why 90% of the companies fail, and why others would succeed, can accelerate their growth much faster.
Okay, so that's a framework, right?
Yes.
But you also talk about that there is no such thing as a ready-made plan that can be created for a startup. And again, we're talking startups, but I think companies that go through transformation, it's the same, similar types of concepts because of the complexities. So, so if there is no ready-made plan, how in the heck could you write a book about a startup, getting a startup to success?
Yeah, you're right. So, running a startup is not like a recipe. There's no recipe. There's no RX, right? One size that fits all. My book is not a plan. It is really a decision framework, right? In there, I described 26 questions for founders or leaders who think through, right? The first thing is why you're on this journey. And then the second one is what problem you're trying to solve. You ask yourself these questions as you go through them, because to be honest with you, Jim, depends on what type of business you're in. These are the general questions you have to ask yourself regardless of what business you're in. But when it comes to detail execution, there are different variations of the plan, right? So you can pretty much search on the internet these days to find, if you want to write a pitch deck, you can get it right away. But I find what's lacking today is a decision, right? What is the thinking process you can go through as someone who wants to start a business, or a leader, even an executive, to look for inspiring tips on how do I get my team, right, and assemble a team, and what is the minimum viable team can help me through the process, right? As you go through the product market fit analysis, what are the questions you ask yourself? And same one applies to define the minimum viable product, define the minimum viable repeatability. What are the things that you have to go through to achieve that? So it is, I came up with 26 questions only because, when you run a marathon, there are 26 miles you go through. So running a startup or running a business is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And this is why, this is what this book is about. But I did give some example about how you align your strategy with the day-to-day execution. There are some real examples out there. And then how do you drive the alignment? Alignment and accountability are two most important aspects for sales and marketing leaders. If they get aligned, they hold each other accountable. That's where you're going to see tremendous amount of success from both sides.
So I had a good friend, or he's still a good friend, who actually referred to himself as an entrepreneurial archaeologist.
I love that.
And so what he would do is study the traits of entrepreneurs that were successful. And so I found his work very interesting and compelling. He was doing work in both Utah and Silicon Valley, a lot of, big startup area. He was in the Salt Lake area. But, if you think about those that are the most successful that you've worked with and those who you've seen, not be part of the 90% failure rate, would you say that there are traits, of an entrepreneur and a successful startup leader that you can identify?
I think they are definitely a few characteristics of successful startup founders I've worked with. However, sometimes it may not be, right? You look at some of they thrive, most of them they thrive on a strong sense of personal self-efficacy. to execute their vision. They also have a keen eye for innovation to identify new products and markets. They're great listeners. Sometimes, I mean, good listener, I can turn ideas into actionable insights, right? They articulate the vision super well, and then they inspire devotion in others, right? Their risk tolerance level is much higher. Their motivation for achievement is much stronger compared to the regular people, right? However, it's really hard to pin down. It would be really nice, right? If we can pin down that, then we can find those people, those people with those traits, and then we can increase the success rate. My response to you is that even though you have founders with those traits, they still need a team of people it's like playing basketball, right? Michael Jordan is my all-time favorite basketball player, but he's not the single person who made Chicago Bulls success, right? The team is what you assemble and make sure they all play in the role that they, especially when it comes to sales. Imagine you have a fantastic salesperson, but without the team who supports that sales rep, you're not going to close the deal. It's really a team sport.
Yeah, he needed a Scottie Pippen, and he needed a Steve Kerr, and he needed
Dennis Rodman.
Yeah, there he goes. It goes on and on, right?
Yeah.
And needed to have a fantastic leader like Phil Jackson. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but I think we do have to also address something that is a significant issue when you start talking about startups. Startups need funding, and being able to acquire the funding. Is that the reality is that there's a massive gender gap between, guys getting funded and women not getting funded. Mm-hmm. And that has been a significant problem for 20 years. And it's also driving a whole lot of women out of the tech space.
Yeah.
Even from just being, programmers and coders and things like that. And then, and so now we're trying to address that issue. So how do we fix how do we make an opportunity for everyone to be successful in these areas?
So that's probably a really great topic for us to even, discuss for a whole day, right? However, I think to be aware of the challenge is the first step to get better. As I say, most people feel comfortable to invest in someone with similar background, right? Like our friends, we have the tendency to make friends with those who are look similar to us, or, grew up in a similar environment. So today's environment, you look at a CEO, there's only less than 5% women CEOs to begin with, right? Even large or small. You look at the board, the composition of the board, there are less than 20% of women on the board. Most of the decision makers are men, right? That's the reality. That's why when it comes to the decision to decide which company they would invest, or which, it oftentimes trickle down who they feel more comfortable to make this bet. So that's the why. In order how to fix that, we have to fix this. We have to take the grassroots effort, right? Meaning that you have to have more tiers of upcoming leaders and female leaders in the workforce, and eventually you're going to grow more of them into the senior leadership type of role and being the decision maker. The faster that happens, the better that's going to go, right? It's going to take time. I still think that we are much better, right? In America, that we're much better. There are tons of opportunities here to excel, right? As a woman, we need to support each other. And then we need to really making sure that we constantly conscious about taking the action to support others. And I actually spend a lot of my time mentoring and coaching other upcoming female leaders in my spare time. And to me, that's just part of that, the things that I can do to make it better. And I hope that, and then I have to say there are a few male leaders I work with. I wouldn't be where I'm at without their mentoring, coaching, and sponsorship, right? So being a sponsor for others out there is the best thing you can do as a leader. It's going to take some time, but I also want to let the female entrepreneurs know that don't give up, right? There are so many rejections we all go through, but you are so close to the success. You might be just a mile away. Like, the Mount Everest climbing experience I described in my book, I was 1 mile away from the flagpole without seeing that flagpole. So at that point, there's 200 people that day climbing, only 3 made it because many people returned. They couldn't see that no one knew it was only 1 mile away. Have they all known it's only 1 mile away, they would all stick right around to make that last mile. But that's part of life. Oftentimes, we don't see how close we are to the success. We just decide to quit on our own. That's what happens, right? That's 80% of the time, that's what happens because you don't get to see that last mile, but keep trying until you get there.
Well, as I say, we didn't come out of the womb learning how to achieve.
Exactly.
Those are, learned behaviors. We didn't learn how to be resilient coming out of the womb. Those are learned behaviors. And so the mentoring that you talk about, is of vital importance, as well as the experience. You have to try. I think you talked about, 3 of the things that continually drive, you and risk taking was one of them. Mm-hmm. Being a constant and continuous learner was another one. I think if you talk about some of the core traits, you'd have to find that amongst all leaders that are successful at any type of transformation or growth effort.
Absolutely, Jim. I think, curiosity, right? Just constantly out there, get yourself out of the comfort zone. That's what I do all the time. I give you an example. I was so afraid of speaking in front of a larger audience growing up. I was more of an intricate, right, or introvert kid. And but I get myself out there. I force myself to go speak at conferences. And I started this 5 years ago. Look at where I'm at now. I speak, I give keynote speech at so many large conferences today and feeling a lot more comfortable, right? And that's how you push yourself to learn. And not to say that's the goal for everybody else, but then if you are not comfortable at certain things, all you need to do is to practice, right? To get yourself out there, learn new things. And, my goal is to be a multiplier, right? If this were the last day of my life, I hope that people remember me as someone who multiplied their prosperity, knowledge, and joy, right? Figuring out what really who you are, what you want to be. That's the first step for you to continue to do what matters to you, right? And that to me is that's so important. Figuring that out is 20% of your success.
Yeah, that's that self-reflection piece and that connection piece and being able to understand where my waypoint needs to be to target. That's the hard part. You also even talk about it in the book. What we don't realize is that we may be able to set that point, but we're not going to get there straight.
Yeah, exactly. You're never going to get there straight, ever. Yeah.
So, and you even talked about, there's a couple of guys who were part of a startup group that you were really focusing in on the very front of the book. And you had said something about asking the question of, if you were in your, 20, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? Well, hell, the person wasn't but 25. it's like, and then what did he say? Patience.
Yes, absolutely.
I thought that was funny.
Okay. I don't know if you know, right? The average success age for startup founders, 45. People don't realize that because the success of Facebook, those are unique. It's not common for all the startups, right? People have this wrong perception. And then Warren Buffett did not become successful at the age of 63.
So I still got time.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have time. Yeah.
Okay. So now I think we have to start looking forward. Okay. You're looking past the summit, right? We need, we're getting over the top. One of the things that I like to ask as far as the question is concerned is, what should And I really want to focus back on that sales and the marketing piece. What should people in those sales and marketing positions be telling themselves right now in the current marketplace? And what do they need to really be thinking in order to grow a business?
So I would tell the sales leader, right, this: if you don't think about what you need to accomplish, you put yourself in your target audience shoes, constantly think about, how can I help improve? How can I help that person, right? This is about value-driven engagement. Think about, if I want to really make it, sales to Jim, what really is relevant to him, right? What's happening in his personal life and career, professionally? What does he need, right? So if we have a conversation with you, I learned that I said, hey, Jim, tell me more about what you do. How are you being measured for your success? So you'll share with me, Helen, I'm really worried about, right, with this pandemic and the sales, my sales is not, the growth is not at the pace I want it to happen. And then when that point, I will just ask you why, right? Jim, tell me more about it, right? What do you think, what has changed with pandemic? Is that your, really customer base, or is it because of a pricing concern, or because you don't have a digital sales tool or whatever that is, right? So we just have this conversation. The lack of understanding of your, I would say ICP and customer base sometimes is a trigger, or is really the root cause of not generating sales. But if the sales team keeps thinking about their quota and target, trying to just dump whatever the solution, if I can say, hey, Jim, I have the solution, I constantly on the LinkedIn, people will reach out to me every single day trying to sell me something. They don't even know what I do, right? So the thing is, if you really put yourself in your target audience shoes, and then the conversation should start on what's relevant to them, not about what you're trying to sell. It's that's the foundational step you have to take. I mentioned earlier, and then I can say, hey, Jim, here's what, I would like to connect you with someone I worked with, right? Why don't you talk to Kevin? Right? Kevin was in your shoes a year ago. And then ever since he worked with us, this is what happened to him. He increased his really growth, right? The growth rate continued to be at 60% compared to last year. Maybe the two of you should connect, right? Talk about what he has done. I'm not going to mention about my product solution at all. I'm going to leave the two of you, right? He is in the same position as you, more credible than I tell you my solution can solve the problem. Right? I'll set up the meeting for the two of you. And then you have a chat. You come back to me. Hey, Helen, I talked to Kevin. I'm interested in learning more. Can you show me more? Right? That's where you can do the demo or show a little bit more. And then, that will be more natural. In the meantime, your marketing leader should really track a little more, knowing that, right, you have certain interests about growth. Then there should be some success stories out there, and then send it to you like campaign, right? To say, here's a success story, about growth and the best practice, without mentioning our product. Is about, how other companies doing, driving the growth, and then through the pandemic, right? Through the current environment. And all those should be part of the go-to-market strategy, right? You think about it, it's not about hard selling and then constantly bombard you with our solution. We're the smart company, the company who are more successful, they really talk about themselves. What they talk about is the impact they have made to their customers, and then they get their customers to talk about the impact they are able to make, right? I think that if Jim, by investing $1 million, you can drive 60% of the growth, right? And for sure. And then you probably would, it's a no-brainer investment for you, right? But then oftentimes what really people stuck there is that I don't want to take this risk, right? We're going through the pandemic, the sales is not picking up. I don't want to spend another $100K not knowing what the outcome might be. But if you can prove the ROI, you can talk to someone who went through that journey, who was like where you're at and went through that journey. And then that reassurance is where, right? How do you really making sure you take your customer or prospect from being ordinary to being extraordinary, show them the path, how to get there. That's the psychological shift you have to help your target audience to make in order for you to, be successful. So I would say, stop thinking about yourself, right? My advice to this, put yourself in your customer's shoes or prospect shoes, and then focus on the value, right? Focus on what success means to them. How do you really bring that value to them to get them achieve their goal? Then, sales will come in naturally, right? You're gonna start seeing the impact, but you really need to shift your mindset and then get deeper understanding of what really matters to your audience.
Helen Yu, I had a fun time chatting with you today. Can you please share with the B2B DM gang how they can get in contact with you?
Thank you, Jim. Likewise. So they can always find me through LinkedIn, right? Taigang HYU, or I'm on Twitter every single day. My Twitter handler is YU Helen Yu. Or I have my website, taigangadvisory.com.
Helen Yu, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you, Jim. Such a pleasure being on your show. Look forward to talking to you more down the road.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.